the structure of media in this country, all the different vehicles, how good a job or bad a job is it doing at this point of sustaining democracy? The core concept of why we would have a media.
I think it's doing a terrible job, and I could go on, and I write books about this, but I'll mention two quick points. The two most important things that governance does is cover how our economy works and our foreign policy and militarism. I mean, those are the real tests of what our government does, what the state does. And I think those are the two great, and to be blunt, Jefferson and Madison, when the First Amendment was being debated and crafted, it was militarism and economic inequality were the two core issues they said were the reasons we needed a free press, a viable, credible, independent fourth estate, was to prevent empire and to prevent the rule of property owners dominating society. And so I think that was their measure. That's the accurate measure today for the quality of a free press system on those two scores. And I think on both those scores, it's dreadful. I think it's absolutely horrendous. And I'll just, one point that's very timely. There was a budget deal done last night, as you all may know, and it was absolutely horrific. And it was horrific for one basic reason. The entire range of debate on economics in this country right now could have been scripted by Secretary of Treasury Andrew Mellon from the Hoover administration. It is premised on the idea that the economy is in trouble because there are deficits, and that the key is to slash spending. It's sort of like the entire history of the Depression has been lost to every single person in Washington, D.C. And our news media, with the wonderful exception of a couple of columnists, just a couple, regrettably, is bought into this completely, because that's what people in power are debating. That's the range of debate. And as a result, we're basically driving our economy in the future for your generation off the cliff, with the worst employment market for people under the age of 30 since the Great Depression, and more downward pressure on wages right now for young people than at any time since the Great Depression, with no end in sight. And that's because our news media has been incapable of escaping the boundaries set by those in power in this country, precisely what Jefferson was most concerned about. Yeah, and I should add that the book that I see you've got a copy there, that you all have a free version of, The Last Reporter, Please Turn Out the Lights. That book, the title sort of gives it away. But that book includes a range of opinions, including several people who are, it's a big debate in the book. It's a series of 32 essays that cover the entire spectrum of debate over this issue, including the position I make and I'm about to make right now. I think what Tom's doing is fantastic, and I'm a big fan of it. And I work with a lot of new ventures in journalism online and digitally. My concern is, I think while they're necessary, I don't think they can ever be sufficient. And I think that that's the argument I make looking historically. And specifically talking about the type of journalism Dan just outlined, which is exactly what we need as sort of a foundation that girds the opinion journalism, which is we need a journalism of scholars, not lawyers. A journalism that's willing to take dissident facts and say, well, if these facts don't corroborate the story, then I change the story. They're factually based. It's not like I just ignore them like a lawyer would because they don't prove my case. And that's really the core of a journalism I think we're trying to get at and generate in our society. And I think the evidence is quite clear to me, historically and internationally and economically, that the market won't give us that. And as long as we're talking about business models, and we're framing in terms of who can make money doing journalism, how can someone make a buck doing journalism, at that level, we're never going to get into the end zone. We might get to the 20-yard line, to use a sports analogy. We might not even get on the field. And I think the way to understand it is that journalism is not a business enterprise. It's not a private good. It's information. It's a public good. And public goods mean it's something society desperately needs, but the market can't produce in sufficient quantity or quality. The public good nature of journalism has been disguised for the last 125 years in the United States because advertising came to provide between 50 and 100% of the revenues. But as everyone knows, advertising didn't support us, they gave a darn about journalism. They were doing this for business aims. And now that they found better alternatives, they're jumping ship. And journalism is left standing naked in the cold winds. And if we're going to have journalism, the type we're talking about, it's going to require massive public subsidies. There's no other way around it. And in this country, in American history, the first 75 years of American history, we had enormous public subsidies for journalism. The founders of this republic had no illusion the market could ever provide sufficient journalism. John and I went for our book, and we actually looked at the data of the postal and printing subsidies in the 1840s, the hard original documents. We calculated what percentage of GDP would the United States today have to spend if it supported journalism to the same extent that the federal government did in the United States in the 1840s, and it would have to spend $35 billion. That's how enormous that subsidy was. The post office was basically the distribution arm of the entire newspaper industry in this country until the 1820s or 30s. Wow. And it was 80% of all federal employees. That's what our government did. It created a free press, and it created the most extraordinary democracy in the world at the time as a result. And they understood that. And if you look at other democratic nations today, and don't compare us to Nazi Germany, don't compare us to Pol Pot's Cambodia, compare us to Canada, Britain, Germany, Sweden, Italy, Japan, South Korea. Compare us to other democracies where civil liberties, you can have meetings like this without getting arrested. We have advanced economies. And what we find, if we spent in this country the same amount subsidizing public media and or journalism as other democracies, instead of spending $1 billion, which we currently spend if you add it all together for public broadcasting, just public broadcasting alone, public media, at the low end, the New Zealand, Canada, Australia level would be spending $7 to $10 billion. At the middle end, Japan and Britain, $20 billion. At the high end, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, $35 billion. We're the ones who are off the grid of democracy. The rest of the world has got an idea how you solve it. Now, that doesn't tell us exactly how we do it. That doesn't mean there are ways to experiment. We can learn from our own history. We can learn from the past. It also doesn't mean because these spectacular technological revolutions, the cost can't plummet because distribution is so much lower. We don't have to necessarily spend that sort of money. But it does mean, I think, that we're serious about really having the sort of journalism that gives us the power to keep people who run this country, runs the economy in check. We know what they're doing. And they answer to us. We don't answer to them. A revolutionary journalism. It's not going to happen unless we make a commitment and invest in it, much like we invest in national defense or public education. Otherwise, I see no evidence it will happen. We'll get some good stuff, but it'll be necessary what we're talking about, but it won't be anywhere close to sufficient. I think the historical and international record makes that clear.
Can the web do it without the subsidies you talk about? You gotta use the mic.
It helps. I see no evidence yet that it can do some good stuff, but nowhere near enough. And I just want to add that when we talk about government subsidies, the striking work in democratic nations shows us, and these are actually The Economist magazine, Freedom House have actually studied other democracies, and the evidence shows, the scholarship shows, and some of it's in the book, that the countries that have the largest journalism subsidies have the most independent, dissident, uncensored press systems in the world by the standards of Freedom House and The Economist magazine. You can have your cake and eat it too. We did in the first 100 years of American history. You can have public subsidies and have a feisty independent press where no one in government pushes the button and says, you get it and you don't. Believe me, I'd be the last person who would stand for that, because in this room, I'm going to first be on the gangplank once the government has that power.
All right, Arti.